Have you ever asked yourself, what does God think when a person says they don't believe that he exists? There are a lot of people you can watch that are atheists who say, I'm not sure God even exists. And people who believe in him are idiots. Okay. I've seen those. Well, today we're going to talk about what God thinks of people that say that, not just verbally, but in their hearts, that actually believe there is no God. We're going to see that today and ask ourselves some very interesting questions about what God says about that person. And ask the question, am I that person? Do I say there is no God? Do I live like I believe there is no God? We're going to talk about that today when we come right back. Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to help you get more impact from your Bible study. I'm here with my friend Jerry Duckett. Jerry and I are continuing our study in various Psalms as we're going. Today we're going to be in Psalm 14, and it's a little psalm. You look at this and say, and there's 7 verses. This is going to take me about 3 minutes. You read through these 7 verses. But I want to talk today about how you can dig deep using some tools. And I'm going to talk about some tools that you can find, that you can use. You don't have to be a seminary graduate or anything else. You don't have to know original languages or anything like that, but you can dig deep and let it speak to your heart. So we're going to do that today, okay? I'm going to talk about things we see, and then I'm going to talk about how to find that, okay? How to discover it. So we'll do that today. Let's get into it right away, Jerry.
Okay, I'm ready.
Let's start it at a good place to start is verse 1.
Good place, yeah.
Now, one of the things you notice when you're coming to Psalms is you notice these bold, where not like 14 is bold and number 4 is bold and number 7 is bold.
Yes.
If you've got a study Bible, the translators who put the Bible together, this is not part of the original language. The chapter numbers and the paragraph numbers aren't part of the original language. They've been put in by the translators to help us as we study. Now, what that means is it's a new paragraph. So if you look down in verse 4, I'll say, oh, that's bold. That's a new paragraph. Now, that helps you because if we scroll up here, we see also verse 7 is bold. That's another paragraph. So that automatically gives you that there are 3 ideas or outlines. So you could go in and say, okay, the first paragraph is verse 1 to verse 3. What is that about? And then the second paragraph is from verse 4 to verse 6. What are those verses about? And it helps you outline the psalm just by looking at the paragraphs. It's just a way that the translators help you if you've got a study Bible. And the other thing on a study Bible is all these cross references down the side that help you. And we're going to look at some of those today. And I'm going to do some other cross references and show you how to do that. But does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, we've looked, and there's this superscription right here for the choir director. So this is supposed to be sung. There's a choir, a Psalm of David. Now, it doesn't tell us anything about when he wrote it, what was on his mind when he wrote it. There's really nothing there that gives us any historical background. So we can say, okay, this psalm is a general psalm that God inspired David to write that basically speaks to us anytime we need it. There's not some kind of historical situation. So we're going to start with the first paragraph, and I'm going to start this. And if I was studying this, which is what I did, I read the first verse. Now go ahead and read the first verse.
The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have committed abominable deeds.
All right. Now, I spent 2 hours in verse 1. Why did I spend that much time in verse 1? Because it's the start of the psalm, but it has a word that is a word that I'm not sure I understand what it means. And that word is fool. It says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Now, he doesn't just say publicly, this isn't somebody who just stands on a street corner and says, there is no God. This is somebody who believes in his heart there is no God. Okay?
Right.
Now, we'll get to the second half of the verse in a minute, but I said to myself, what does the Bible say about the fool that would help me understand what a fool is? Okay? Now, a fool is somebody who says there is no God. So if I get an atheist and he says, I don't believe there's a God, I can know in my heart that the Bible would classify that person as a fool. So what I did was I used the tool of a concordance and I looked up the word fool. And I looked at verses that had that word in it and said, does that apply to me understanding what a fool is? And I want to share 3 verses with you. Right over here in my notes, I've got the fool and I've got 3 definitions. So I want you to flip to Isaiah chapter 32, verse 6.
The fool speaks nonsense, and his heart inclines toward wickedness, to practice ungodliness, and to speak error against the Lord, to keep the hungry person unsatisfied, and to withhold drink from the thirsty.
Okay, so that basically says the fool in his heart decision doesn't believe in God and acts wickedly. Okay, now I want to go to another verse. Look back in my notes to Proverbs chapter 10, verse 23.
Wickedness is like sport to a fool, and so is wisdom to the man of understanding.
Again, a fool acts wickedly. You see that again?
Yes.
Proverbs is saying something very similar to what Isaiah said. Now, the other cross reference I have there is Romans chapter 1, verse 22 and 28. Verse 22 says this, professing to be wise, they became fools. And then down in verse 28, it says, and just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper. So there again, we see a verse that's talking about the fool who acts wickedly or acts improperly as far as God's concerned. And you can see that all 3 of those verses that I found have the word fool in them. So I just went to a concordance, looked up the word fool. There's a whole bunch of verses, and I just went down and read them and said, this verse really speaks to me about what the fool is. This doesn't say he's a fool. It said what makes him a fool is he acts wickedly. Okay?
Yes.
So out of this concordance of all these verses, I picked that out as helping me understand the fool is someone who has made a heart decision that I'm going to do my own thing and I'm going to act the way I'm going to act. And I know people like that. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm not calling them a fool, but the Bible calls them a fool. And a lot of people will read this psalm and go, I don't like this because I don't want to be called a fool and I don't like to call other people a fool. God's calling them a fool. Now, we're going to see that in a second here. But we saw in this other half of verse 1, they are corrupt. They have committed abominable deeds. Now, we saw that in these verses up here. One of the common things of a fool is that he acts unrighteously. He acts wickedly. But this idea of corrupt, now I noticed something very interesting. If you look, I drew a line from the word corrupt down to this word corrupt.
Yes.
Now, I used a concordance with a tool called a lexicon that's attached to the concordance. And how it works is when you see a word like corrupt, in this case, and it gives you a bunch of verses, okay? And it'll say, okay, here's the word corrupt, and here's Psalm 14, verse 1. And there's a little number after that. And that's a number in a directory of what the Hebrew word for corrupt means. You can go to that number in the back of your concordance if it's got a lexicon, and it should. A good concordance will have a lexicon. And you read what that word corrupt means. Now, why that's important is very interesting. Let's look back at this. This word corrupt in the English says corrupt. In the Hebrew, that means causing trouble. They are corrupt in their actions, right? And that fits in here in that the fool said in his heart, there is no God. They cause trouble and commit abominable deeds. So that makes sense. Now, what's interesting is this word corrupt that the translators translated as corrupt is a completely different Hebrew word. And in the Concordance, it'll have a completely different little number off to the right. And this Hebrew word means sour, bad milk. So verse 3 says, they have all turned aside. Together they have become sour, like sour milk. And we'll get to a cross reference there in a second. But a concordance with a lexicon can help you get into what the original language says. And you're not a scholar in Hebrew. I'm not. But I went, oh, that's an interesting, because that's a different number. I was studying the Bible and the word shield in the book of Psalms. I looked it up in a concordance, and there were shields that had one number and other shields that had a different number. And I looked them up. One number means a big fort that you hide behind, and the other means a small piece of armor that's attached to you that you can use as defense and offense. The English word is shield, but you can find out what the Hebrew word means just by using a concordance with a lexicon. That's a wonderful tool for deep Bible study, where you can find out things like, what's the word corrupt mean? Okay.
It changes your thinking about what's being said.
Yeah. And it does, it just helps. Now, the last piece of verse 1 is, there is no one who does good. And this word good means real good, morally desirable. Now, you'd say, wait a minute, I know a lot of non-Christians that do good things. They pick up trash, they give donations to hospitals, they give blood, whatever it is. And you'd say, wait a minute, it says nobody does good. I know a lot of non-Christians. There are Buddhists, there are Muslims, there are all kinds of people who do good things.
Right.
So the Bible is saying no one does good. And you go, okay, I got to define what good means. And what good means is morally acceptable to God. And we're going to see that here as we go along. So it's basically saying they might go through their life doing okay things, but as far as God is concerned, these are not morally acceptable things that are going to lead to living a life of righteousness. They could be wicked things that society says, oh, that's a good thing. Okay, let's go on. Verse 2. Now you can see where we could spend a couple of hours at least on verse 1. We got to look up what the fool means. We got to look up the word corrupt. We could look up the word heart. We could go off and do cross references like that. We could stop and say, there is no one who does good. And you go, wait a minute, I know people who do good. I look up that word, and it means morally desirable. And you go, morally desirable from who? Who decides what is morally desirable? Look at the next verse. The Lord looks down from heaven upon the sons of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. Okay? So God is the one who is looking down upon man, and in God's eyes, deciding if mankind is accountable and is accomplishing anything morally desirable. Do you see that?
Yes.
And he's looking to see if there are any men, looking now upon the sons of men, to see if there are any who understand. Now, if you go over here, there's a little number here, number 1 in your study Bible. Hopefully you got that. And over here in verse 2, if you go to, that's number 1, the Hebrew word for understand is act wisely. So he's looking down from heaven. He is deciding who on earth is acting in a morally desirable fashion. Okay. And he's looking to see if there are any human beings who understand, who act wisely according to him. See, who seek after God. So you go, okay, one thing I know about people who deny that God exists, they do good things, but they don't do good things based upon a moral imperative that God gives them. They're doing their own thing. That happens, looks okay. But when God looks at it, it says, this is not an action based upon understanding my moral imperatives. It's acting in a way and not thinking about what does God want.
Right.
And that defines a fool. All right. So in that first paragraph, verse 3 says, they, and this is the they, that the fool, they have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. Now, Hebrews 11, verse 6 says, without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. So see that up here in verse 2 says, he's looking for people who seek him. And mankind has all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. And that corrupt is they can't please him because they are not seeking him to do the right thing. And then he repeats the same thing he said in verse 1. There is no one who does good, but then he adds, not even one. Now, we're not going to turn there, but in Romans chapter 3, verse 9 through 20 and verse 23, Paul, when he's writing and explaining what living a good life means and what believing means, Romans 3:23 says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Everybody. And that's what this verse says. No one does good, not even one. And in verse 9 through 20 in chapter 3, Paul literally quotes from this psalm and other psalms and Isaiah with this same exact idea, and you can do those cross references over in Romans. So I could stop there and go, I'm going to research this verse, and I come to Romans 3, 9 through 20 and verse 23. I could spend an hour doing the cross references out of Romans chapter 3. You see how that can take me deep by looking for cross references that say the same thing that verse is saying. Now we go, wait a minute, there are good people who are not Christians. Yes, there are, but they are not spiritually good people because they are not seeking after God and saying, God, what do you want in my life? I want to do that. That I want to act wisely and do what you want.
Right.
The non-believer is just doing his own thing, and he doesn't understand what God wants, so he's just doing his thing. And God says that's a fool, because no matter how hard he tries, he can't do the spiritually correct thing, the morally correct thing, because he has no understanding of what the morally correct thing is, because
Right.
he's not seeking after God. You see how that works?
Yes.
All right. So we've used the concordance. We've used a dictionary. We've looked up some terms. Now we continue on to the next paragraph. It talks about the wicked lack understanding. He says, verse 4, do all the workers of wickedness not know who eat up my people as they eat bread, and they do not call upon the Lord? So this is the wickedness that it's talking about of those who act wickedly. They're wicked in that they don't know what God wants. Now, I looked up the verse in Proverbs, chapter 1, verse 7, and it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So this is the idea. There's the workers of wickedness, which are described up here as fools. They don't know because they despise the wisdom and instruction of God. And as a result, when it says, who eat up my people as they eat bread, this is talking about these non-believers devour believers. It's the old thing of they chew them up and spit them out.
Yeah.
I think of Mr. T. You remember who Mr. T was?
Oh, yeah.
From the A-Team?
I met him one time.
And he would go, you fool.
Yeah.
We don't like to be called fool. But it was basically, you fool, you don't understand what's going on. Okay? That's what he meant. And this is what God is basically looking at: a guy who is refusing his instruction, refusing to follow his directions, refusing to live morally on his standards, on God's standards, and saying, you fool, because you're going to, and look where he goes here. He says, you do not call upon the Lord. There, now where's the there? The there is this state of foolishness. They are in great dread because, for God is with the righteous generation. Okay? So it's this idea of judgment is coming. So you can be a fool who denies God. You can say, I'm not going to live according to what God wants. I'm going to be my own boss. I'm going to do my own thing. And in the dark, in the night, you're going, if God exists and if he has a judgment, yikes, where am I going to be? in death. That's why there's a very much fear of death, because that means I could stand before a God who I don't even believe exists. I could stand before him and answer the question.
Yes.
Now, so far, who has he been talking to? Who is the psalmist talking to so far?
Talking to the congregation.
Yeah, there's not once in here does he address God. This is a sermon to the congregation. Nowhere in this he say, "Oh Lord, help me seek after you." Nothing. There's no prayer in this. All of a sudden, he addresses somebody other than the congregation. Look at verse 6. You would put to shame the counsel of the afflicted. And the afflicted are the believers who you are devouring, my people. And it says, you would put to shame the counsel of the afflicted, but the Lord is his, the afflicted, the believers' refuge. So who is the you he's talking to? And I wrote it right over here. This one verse is addressed to fools. This is the only place that the fools are directly spoken to. The rest of the psalm is to the congregation about fools.
Yeah, now I got you. I see
But
it.
verse 6, he turns and he said, basically, if there were fools sitting off to the side, he would turn to them and say, hey, you fools, this is for you.
Yes.
Speaks to the fools who are devouring God's people, the believers, and saying, don't you get the fact that God is their refuge? God is where the believer can go to be protected from you.
Yes.
The fool who likes to make fun of believers. And a lot of people that say there is no God, and they look, you are an idiot for believing God exists. Oh yeah? Right. Continue to think that, buddy, because there'll be a day when I'm standing before God as a believer and he's my refuge, and you're standing before God and he's your judge. Then the third and last paragraph. Oh, this is back to us again. See where I wrote that in my notes, just so I've got it clear. Back to us. Oh, that the salvation of Israel would come out of Zion. And Zion is basically a term for Jerusalem. It's for the holy city. That this is a prayer, but he's not praying to God. He's basically just saying to the people, because if he was praying to God, he would say, when you restore his captives. You see that? So it's talking about the Lord, not talking to the Lord. Oh, that the salvation of Israel would come up out of Zion when the Lord restores. And if you look at that little word, the little number 2, you go over to 7, and the number 2 is restores the fortunes of his people. That's the Hebrew. When the Lord restores his captive people. So it's basically, the Hebrew would read, when the Lord restores the fortunes of his people. And then there's a very interesting verse. Now I want to look at this last verse carefully and ask some questions. Jacob will rejoice. Now, who's Jacob in history? Do you remember?
That's the son of
Isaac. Isaac had 2 sons, Esau and Jacob. And Esau sold his birthright, the blessings, for a bowl of soup to Jacob. And Jacob fooled his dad into giving him the blessing. So the word Jacob means cheater. It means depraved. It means it's someone who is a liar and a cheat. Okay? And then you look at that verse and you go, Jacob will rejoice. In other words, people who are cheaters, people who have acted wickedly, okay, in their life. Jacob was a cheater. They will rejoice in the salvation of the Lord, up here in verse 7. The salvation of Israel would come out of Zion. When it does, when salvation comes, the cheaters and the sinners who have been living wickedly will rejoice in the Lord's salvation. And the other word that's important is Israel will be glad. Now, who's Israel? That's a trick question, because Israel is Jacob when God changed his name. Now, you remember, Jacob was this cheater, and he has a revelation that he's a cheater. And he repents, and he wrestles with the angel, saying, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. And the angel finally blesses him, but God says, I'm now going to change your name to Israel. And what Israel means is the one who wrestles with God. And Israel becomes the name of God's people because they are wrestling with these issues, that God is their refuge and they need to come to him. Now, that's a lot better than wrestling with wickedness. So that last verse gives two things: rejoice and be glad. The same people are going to rejoice and be glad. When they rejoice, they're non-believing, wicked people like Jacob. They become believers, and God renames them people of God, Israel. That's the same name, same guy.
Yeah.
It's just a before believing and after believing. So he said, before believing, he's going to rejoice that there is a salvation that comes out of Zion that God offers. And he's going to rejoice that God offers a salvation. And then he's going to be glad that he, as a believer, is going to be a recipient of that. Now, you could go off and spend a lot of time. And in fact, I'm going to look at Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 14 and 15. Let me read it to you. It's this idea of Israel will be glad. I looked up the word glad and just started to see, what does that really mean? And what are verses that talk about this? And here's the verse in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 14 and 15. Shout for joy, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O Israel. Rejoice and exult with all your heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. Verse 15, the Lord has taken away his judgments against you. He has cleared away your enemies. So that's a great cross reference to this idea that as believers, we might be persecuted by the fool who's trying to devour us like he eats bread, but we call upon the Lord, we take refuge in him, and the Lord restores us, verse 7, and we can rejoice in our salvation and be glad that he has saved us because of mercy and grace. Now, I could go off and do a lot more verses about rejoicing and being glad. I could use a concordance again, look up the word glad, look a bunch of verses, look up the word rejoice, look up a bunch of verses. So I just wanted to give you this idea that this tool of a concordance with a lexicon attached, and most of the time when you buy a concordance, it would say concordance with lexicon, and you want that. The concordance will give you the English words from the verses in that translation. And you make sure that the concordance you use is the same translation that you use in your study Bible. I have a New American Standard Concordance.
Yeah.
So the words are going to match up in the translation. Make sense?
Yeah.
So we say, we pull out of that after hours of doing fun Bible study out of those 7 verses. I'm talking probably 4 or 5 hours. We could spend a week of quiet times in Psalm 14, 7 verses. I could spend a week. Every day I could spend an hour or two. Then I'm meditating on those verses.
Yeah.
That's digging deep, using a tool to dig. Same way you use a shovel to dig deep. You're going to use a tool to dig deeply into God's word.
What was the meaning of the name Israel? The one who...
Israel is he who wrestles with God. In other words, I strive with God. And that became his new name, as people who desire salvation, desire a relationship with me. As Jacob said to the angel, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me.
Yeah.
He strove with God to be blessed.
Yes.
As compared to being a cheater and a liar. And before I was a Christian, I was a Jacob. I was a cheater and a liar. After I became a Christian, I'm an Israel. I am one who strives with God in my life, who can look back and say, God delivered me. I can take refuge in him. I can exult and rejoice in my relationship with him. That the fool cannot do because he has no relationship with God.
It would be easy to read that and think that, and that the salvation of Israel being the state of Israel rather than...
No, it's not. In the Old Testament, Israel is not a political group. It is a group of people who are the people of God by covenant. And so it's not Israel, the state. It's Israel, the group of people.
Group of people. But it's easy.
The Jews, okay?
Yes.
Another name. That'd be another name. But it also could be the people of God as in believers. Paul said in Romans, we who were not the people of God have become the people of God. We have become the Israel. Now, we haven't replaced Israel. We've been grafted in And we too, the Gentile believer, is also Israel.
Yeah.
Okay? Well, we've been talking about the fool, the way they live, their destination. I want to recommend a video to you. It's called, Are You Foolish or Wise? Out of Ecclesiastes chapter 10. Think you'll find it interesting. If you do, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the like button. That helps us with YouTube. And listen, we're going to continue in Psalms next week. And until then, God bless you.